All right, everybody, welcome back to episode 6 of Intel Within Podcast. It's Gresham, myself, and our special guest, Michael Sugrue, and we're going to give a quick synopsis of what he does in his background and what he is doing now currently. Michael Sugrue is a national speaker, an author, a retired police sergeant, former U.S. Air Force Security Forces captain, and first responder and military mental health advocate. He shares his incredible story in his new book, Relentless Courage, to help end the stigma of mental health for our frontline workers. Michael, thank you for coming. We greatly appreciate.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's my pleasure. This is awesome. My first in-person interview, so
Very
this
cool.
this is good stuff.
We got it.
Exactly.
So, what got you started to write the book?
That's a good question. Actually, I never planned on it. I never envisioned it. I'll take you back to 2019, and there's this guy named Danny Bird.
Mhm.
He is a former police officer. Didn't know him. He actually found me on LinkedIn, and he reached out to me. He was a big fitness guy. He knew I liked to work out. That's why you and I met at the gym.
Yeah.
And he said, "Hey, I want to have you on my fitness podcast and talk about mental health." And I was like, "You know what? I appreciate what you're doing, but I'm not interested. Like, I'm not trying to be out there sharing my story."
Mhm.
And fortunately, this guy pretty much harassed me. I mean, I was thinking restraining order time, but it didn't go to that level. And eventually, I agreed to do it. I was like, "You know what?" He said, "I'll drive all the way to you." He was down in San Jose. He was like, "Name the spot." So I picked Mimi's Cafe in Fairfield, actually. And I get there, and I'm thinking we're gonna have some breakfast, some coffee, get to know each other.
Mhm.
He's in the back room, and actually on the interview, you can hear the Mimi's Cafe music playing subtly. It's kind of funny.
There you go.
He's got a laptop, headphones, and there's a camera set up.
Gosh.
He's got a cup of coffee, and he's like, "Hey, I'm really sorry, but I gotta leave in an hour, so we're just gonna get started." And so he's like, "Put the headphones on," and I sat down, and he just started asking me questions, and that was the first time I ever shared my story publicly. I mean, first time. And even though it was just him and I, when that thing got aired and put out there, that was two magical things happened. The first thing was I was so embarrassed and ashamed of everything I had dealt with, the things I had gone through. I would say like 90% or more of the people I worked with,
Mhm.
even my family members, had no idea like what I was going through, had no idea that I literally wanted to end my life at certain points, that I was putting myself in dangerous situations. And so when this got put out there, this burden that was on my shoulders, it was magically gone because I was trying to control the narrative. I was trying to prevent this information from getting out to anybody because I didn't want them to know this.
Mhm.
And on top of that, this is the best part is I started getting messages from all over the world. I mean, Canada, Australia, the UK, because this guy had an established audience. And so people that watched and listened to the interview started sending me personal messages and sharing their personal stories. And that's where this whole momentum started. And so initially it was just like podcast after podcast after podcast. Eventually it led to speaking. And it was small, like just a little agency. Eventually, it was like the National Guard headquarters in Sacramento, and then flying all over the U.S.
Wow.
And then the book. This is another thing. So LinkedIn. If you're not on LinkedIn, get on LinkedIn. Dr. Shauna Springer. Again, I didn't know her. Turns out she lived in the city I worked in as a police officer. We never met. She never heard of me. She didn't know anything about me.
Yeah.
Small world.
Yeah, right. And she sends me a message on LinkedIn just saying, "Hey, I like what you're doing as far as, the suicide prevention, post-traumatic stress education. I just want to have a phone call and introduce myself and see what you're doing, find out what I'm doing." So she calls and she tells me about stellate ganglion block, which we talk about in the book, and I've had the procedure done.
Mhm.
And honestly, when she was talking about it, I'm like, yeah, this is kind of weird. Like, I don't even know about any of this SGB stuff, but she seemed real nice. And I told her my story, like real in depth. I mean, the dirty, the ugly, everything about it. And she asked me, "Have you ever thought about writing a book?" And I was like, "It's funny you asked that because I've been asked that before." And I said, I honestly, I'm so burnt out from like 20 plus years of report writing in law
Right.
enforcement and then just the lack of focus and concentration from post-traumatic stress. I said, I don't think I could get something like that done.
Yeah.
So we end the conversation. A couple months later, and this is right before COVID, she hits me back up and she's like, "Look, I can't stop thinking about your story, what you told me." She's a clinical psychologist, so she's worked with the VA, TAPS, Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, and she said, "I've heard hundreds and hundreds of trauma stories, but your story is gonna help countless people." And she said, "I wanna make this book a reality." And so I didn't hesitate in that phone call. We hadn't even met in person.
Right.
I said, "Let's do this." And
Mhm.
so we started this journey. COVID happened. We didn't meet. We did it all via Zoom for like the first year, every week, 2 hour Zoom meetings going back and forth. And now it's here. And it's doing amazing. It's saving lives. I mean, it's saving relationships, it's saving careers, but most importantly, it's saving lives. And it's changing perceptions. Like this lets you see the true human behind the badge and behind the uniform.
Yeah, it's a good outreach for people that just some because like some people are like don't want to talk about it or afraid to talk about it, but coming from your experience and being able to read it and kind of feel like they know you in this sense and they're getting to know like you through this book, and then like eventually like some books that I read too, when I'm able to like understand everything from start to finish, it's almost like a breath of fresh air in certain situations. So like I feel like that would impact people a certain way of when they're able to read it and understand that like it could take a burden off of their shoulders just because of you writing this book and reaching them through paper. So
Yeah, I totally agree because when I read it and just dealing with some of the stuff that I've got going on, and um, it kind of gives you a sense of community and feels like you're not alone. You know what I mean? And then not even just hearing your story or reading your story, but knowing that so many other people are gleaning information from it and feeling not alone. And that shame you talked about before, that feeling about like what happened to you and not wanting to talk about it. And I can 100% relate to that because when I go to talk about certain things with people and like just kind of share other stories, it's like you almost feel like they're judging you for what you have to say because you're struggling. And so to hear you be so open about it and know that others are being open because you were open with it, it's really encouraging. And reading it was like you said, a breath of fresh air in
yeah.
that arena for me specifically. So
Well, the fact is, I'm not special. I'm not unique.
right.
And the things that I talk about in this book, I mean, it goes all the way back to childhood. I
Hmm.
talk about marital problems. I talk about health issues, family problems. And so this book resonates, I mean, of course, with first responders,
Hmm.
with veterans, military members, but their spouses, their children, their loved ones, just people on the street.
Hmm.
And, for so long, I was ashamed and embarrassed. And I thought I was the only one. I thought I was the only one that felt this way, that was going through these things. And it turns out that there's endless of our brothers and sisters out there who are struggling in silence. And, the fact is that suicide is the number one killer of all active military, all military veterans, and all first responders. And that's undisputed. Even with the numbers being greatly underreported, it's the number one killer. And that's why we did this book, is to help stop this crisis and get people to realize there is hope, there is help. And this isn't just my story, but it provides the solutions, the answers, and it gives resources on how to actually get better.
So what is you touch base on you said like marital and family as you were younger as well. So what is a story or something that like can correlate from the family when you were growing up? Because I know a lot of people now growing up, whether they have both parents or one parent, that's kind of where it stems from. I feel like for some people where they grow up in a not so you know a custom family, and then there's fallouts, and then there's like that trauma that comes with a 5, 6, 7, 8 year old, to where that kind of I hate to say the word, but it's like kind of like grooms them into the sense like down this spiral, down this like this bad path. So what is something that that you could share that when you were younger that you experienced that somebody out there can kind of touch base with you as well?
Well, for me, my parents got divorced when I was 8 years old, and that in itself really wasn't traumatic. I mean, in a
Hmm.
sense, it is because your parents are separating. But I had kind of like both sides. So I had a really good upbringing, and I had some negative influence. And so my mom got remarried early on to my stepfather.
Hmm.
He was in law enforcement. He was my hero, great man, a great father, treated me like his natural son. I mean, treated my mom like a queen, and he was my inspiration. I mean, he is the reason why I eventually went into the military and law enforcement. Now, my biological father eventually, after my parents got divorced, he got into drugs, he
Mm,
got into alcohol. He was not there for a lot of things. There was a period in his life where I didn't see him, I didn't talk to him. And so, I consider that kind of on the minor end of the spectrum when we talk about childhood trauma.
Mhm.
But we talk about this in the book. But the reality is that, and I know people don't want to hear this, but the reality is that a vast majority of first responders and military members have some form of childhood trauma. Now, I want to kind of back that up and say, look, it could be very minor. It could be in the sense that you have a parent who's just working a lot. They're not home, so they're not really there for you when you need them. I mean, they're
Mhm.
providing, they're putting a roof over your head, but they've got to work 3 jobs to pay the bill. Or maybe they're not affectionate, maybe they're emotionally distant. But the far end of the spectrum, we're talking about, sexual abuse, physical abuse, addiction, like I talked about,
Mhm.
alcoholism. And so, there's a wide range of things, but what happens is at a very young age, we learn to overcome adversity, we adapt to very harsh situations. We're good at making critical decisions and taking care of ourselves. And so that actually makes us very good at what we do as far as in the military,
Mhm.
as first responders. And it actually makes us successful later on in life. But the problem is that most of us, including myself, I almost pretended like that never happened. I created this kind of perfect life and image, and I kind of just brushed it away, thinking it just really never bothered me
Mhm.
until something happened
mm.
and something brought that all right back up front. And that's usually what happens is that you kind of stuff all this stuff away. And then later on in adult life, something big happens and it just brings all that right back up, all that stuff that you never processed, you never dealt with.
I couldn't agree with you more when you said that people in the military have a lot of trauma in their past. Because having been an NCO for the majority of my career and talking to my airmen and getting to know them, you really learn a lot about their stories. And you just ask the simple questions about, hey, why did you join the Air Force? And how many times have you heard, I came in to get away from something? And normally it's some sort of parental trauma or trauma with family members. Whether it's I had an alcoholic parent or this terrible thing happened to me. We all tend to kind of m- congregate toward the military in that way. And I think that plays on that impulse that kind of develops from having traumatic events happen to you, to where you feel like you kind of want to protect others. And I think it feeds into that a lot. Um, and I know for me personally, that feeling is pretty ever present. You know what I mean? And I mean, how many times have we had a conversation at work with other people and trying to understand like why we all are here and like talking about our why?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the people you're around, but it's a lot of what happened in your past is your why. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
it's for a lot of people too, because I joined the military late. I joined at like 31,
Mm.
and some people were like, "Oh man, like going through boot camp and tech school, I'm the oldest person, right?" They're like, "Why did you join? Why did you join?" Of course, other reasons stemming from that because of COVID and the couple of businesses that I owned. It was just, it was a nice thing to join into because a guaranteed paycheck, b, believe it or not, for most people it's structure, right? Like you have,
Hmm.
like, you go to work, 06 to 1800 whenever you work, and you have something to do from start to finish. You've got protocols, everybody follows procedures, and so that's what it is. And I think that there are some people right now that I know that I work with, um not going to mention any names, obviously, but for them, it's the fear of getting out now because of not having that structure and having to worry so much about being able to provide for their family and like what the civilian life holds. And some people that does really stress them out, gives them anxiety, depression, adjustment disorder. The reason why I know about those three is because I got diagnosed with those because of what happened, and trying to, and then, knowing that I'll be getting out, and like, the unknown for me was like a big thing. So I'm like, how am I going to provide for the family? What am I going to do? My wife's getting deployed for almost a year.
Yeah.
And so it's a huge thing. And, a lot of people don't talk about that. And that's why, like, having someone like you you're this one person with so much of an outreach, and it's a good thing for people to listen to, because some people are afraid to go do therapy. They don't want to go sit down and talk in front of somebody and tell them their problems because they're embarrassed. But
Absolutely.
something is harmless as a book, it's got so much great information that it could, like you said, can change people's lives and save lives.
And there's a lot of relatable stuff in your book, like you talked about, going through tough situations like divorce, being separated from children, going through tough situations at work. That definitely, speaking just from my experience in the military, that almost everybody you've been in long enough, you're going to have some sort of story, right? And
Absolutely.
there's so much in this book that's relatable that when you're reading it, it's like you start thinking about conversations you've had with other people. You start maybe realizing, how talking about some of your problems really isn't that big of a deal anymore. And so there's just so many levels that this can get down into the weeds with, in your brain and in your heart about what you should do to take care of yourself. And, when did you first start serving?
Well, 8 years old, actually, if you want to go all the way back to childhood.
Hmm.
So I was a police volunteer for the Sausalito Police Department at 8, was a police explorer at 16.
Okay.
When I went into college, I had a full scholarship to the Air Force. So I was serving as a cadet.
Got you.
I was commissioned in 98, served 6.5 years active duty,
Hmm.
Middle East, South America, all over Europe. And I
Hmm.
went straight into law enforcement when I was still on use or lose or terminal leave.
Hmm.
And so if you really look at it, I mean, I served from basically, what would that be, like 1982 until 2018 when I medically retired
Hmm.
from civilian law enforcement. But
Right.
for me, it's a calling. Like for me, it's
Absolutely.
a higher purpose. None of this was random. Like, hey, you know what? Let me go try this job out. Or like to me, it was always a higher calling, higher purpose.
Hmm.
And that's where this comes up because, and a lot of people have said this, they go, a lot of people that leave on post traumatic stress injury, whether it's military, law enforcement, firefighters, you never hear from them again. They, want to live their life as quietly as possible, which I totally respect, I totally get. But for me, I felt like, no, I need to do more. Like I'm not done. I retired at 43 years old. And so now what am I going to do the rest of my life? I can't be a police officer anymore. And so for me, this is my purpose.
Hmm.
This is what, other than being a father, which is my first purpose and my first priority, this is what wakes me up every day to get out there, to do interviews, to talk, because that's the thing is that people don't talk about this stuff,
No.
and we haven't touched on this yet really, but I talk a lot about admin betrayal or moral injury or institutional betrayal. And this ties into our childhood trauma that we just talked about because for many of us, whether it's military or first responders, we find this new great family, right?
Hmm.
We find this family that loves us, they take care of us, they support us. We know, like in combat or in danger situations, they've got our back, like to the
Hmm.
fullest,
Yeah.
right? But then something happens at some point, whether we get physically injured, whether it's a mental injury, whether we get ourselves into trouble, whether it's financially or maybe something happens off duty, maybe it's, marital problems, maybe it's health issues. But when our administration or our organization turns their back on us when we need them most, this is actually what pushes most people over the edge.
I completely agree.
It's not the trauma exposure, and that does have effects. It has a lot of effects, but what compounds that is this moral injury, institutional betrayal. Because, and I'll look at it this way: you have your childhood trauma, right? You kind of push that away. Now you have your work-related trauma, whether it's military or first responder,
Hmm.
Yep.
and then on top of that, you have this moral injury or institutional betrayal. I mean, you have all these things which need to be dealt with. But when they're piled up like that, the cards are stacked against you.
This honestly, I was the next question I was going to ask you is if you could describe the climate of what the Air Force was like, in your time with dealing with mental health issues. And I have a feeling it's probably, maybe even worse or exactly the same as what we experience and I've experienced over the past 13 years of my career is that institutional betrayal that you're talking about is that it's almost like when times are good, we're here for you, but when you need to take that break from whatever happened to take a knee and recover,
Yeah.
they look at you like there's a problem and that you're like you're a problem, right? And that
Absolutely.
community that you've built, and you think you've gone through these things with people, you sit and listen on posts with somebody for 12 hours or whatever, and you listen to their life stories, you do, work with them, you go to meet their families, all this stuff, and then the second something happens where you need to take a knee, it kind of turns your back on you because they don't want to be a part of that. And it's almost like that stigma that exists there now because of what you're going through is somehow going to taint them, and
Hmm.
they kind of almost it's like a shunning almost.
Yes. Yes.
And I've definitely experienced that, and bet you could talk to 1,000 or more military members, and they would tell you the same thing. But you hit the nail on the head. I think a lot of the things when you go and talk to somebody about what's really bothering them, it's knowing just how they're viewed at work, or what they think people, or how they feel like their perception is at work. And one thing too that I've noticed over my time, especially the last few years, is that people are nice to your face when you're sitting there trying to explain what's bothering you, but the second you leave that room and they go into a room and they start talking to other people, they don't talk about what they can do to help you. They
Yeah.
talk about, kind of like putting you down, very condescending conversations to kind of separate themselves from you enough to put themselves in almost like a position of, moral authority to make some determination about you, and it becomes very hard to recover from that. And then you have to deal with that almost double faced behavior, and then people aren't straightforward with you about how they actually perceive you. So you're left to wonder, and there's a lot of gaps that your anxiety is very, very bad at filling in, because then a lot of times it doesn't become what's actually going on, or it's almost like creating this cognitive dissonance where you can't get away from those thoughts.
Yeah.
And that, I agree with you, is exponentially worse than normally what happened to you, is how the people that you've come to build a community with treat you in return.
Yeah. It's no, you just hit the nail on the head. And I look at it like this, and they say things are getting better, and they are getting a little bit better slowly. Like I said, I speak all across the nation in person.
Yeah.
Usually it's for like training conferences or symposiums. It's put on by associations or nonprofits. Very rarely do I see actual police chiefs that bring in speakers like myself,
Mhm.
because the reality is that today, right now, as we speak, a lot of so-called leaders or chiefs of organizations, they look at post-traumatic stress like cancer, and they don't want people talking about it.
Mm.
They don't want to acknowledge that it's out there. Oftentimes they want to pretend like it doesn't exist.
So they see this as something that's like you're going through it and it's going to spread to other people.
No, absolutely. And I'm going to tell you, I'm actually going to tell you a story that I've never talked about in any interview. And this is a true story. So when we were writing this book, it hadn't been published yet. And when you look inside the book, there's tons of written endorsements on the inside and the outside from military leaders, law enforcement leaders, police chiefs, just people who loved the book and praised it. And there was a police chief actually here in California in the Bay Area, and I'm not going to say their name or the organization for good
Of
reason,
course.
but I reached out to this person like I did all the other people who wrote the endorsements. And I had a discussion with this person. And I
Hmm.
said, look, and he said, honestly, he's like, I don't know if I'm the best person to actually read this. And I said, well, why is that? And he basically said that he thinks a lot of people are faking this or making it up. And I said, okay, I understand what you're saying. And I said, unfortunately, I think there are some people out there who are abusing the system. And I will acknowledge that. I said, but I want you to read this. I want you just to read it. I want your honest opinion. And I'm hoping maybe it might change your view, it might change your perception. So this person agreed to read it. And a couple weeks later, my co author and I hit him up and we asked, hey, how's it going? He said, hey, I'm about halfway done. I should be done with the book by the end of the weekend. Cool. Right on.
Mhm.
And so we're waiting to hear from this guy. We don't hear anything. I let a couple weeks go by.
Hmm.
And again, we're waiting to publish this book. Now, mind you, I've already heard back from every single person. This is the only person who didn't get back to
This is
us.
starting to sound familiar.
So eventually, and I'm out speaking in another state. Eventually, I send him an email, no response. My co author sends him an email. These are all very nice
Yeah,
emails, no
of
response.
course.
I text, no response. And then, like, I mean, we're literally like, we got to publish this book. Like, we're not waiting any longer. And I was so pissed off. I texted this person and I sent them, I won't say nasty, but a very truthful
Yeah.
text message about somebody they knew that if they knew how he was treating me and basically ghosting me,
Mm-hmm.
that he would roll over in his grave. I immediately got a phone call within a minutes from this person who I had heard from in months after emails, text messages, voicemails. But this text message set him off.
Mm-hmm.
He called me back, started yelling, didn't let me talk, and spoke for like 30 seconds and slammed the phone on. Never heard from him again.
Mm.
Now, this is the reality. This chief, thank God, has since retired, but that chief was an active chief of a very large organization here in the San Francisco Bay Area who is in charge of people and their welfare and their lives. And we're talking about lives here
Mm-hmm.
because if you pretend like this doesn't exist and this isn't real, people will die.
Yeah.
Yep.
And their blood will be on your hands. And that is the
Mhm.
reality of this. And I go all over the place, and I'm not going to dime out certain regions or certain states, but California as a whole is very progressive. So we're actually very advanced.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, California has a lot of negative things,
For
Sure.
sure.
but I would say as far as like in law enforcement and that
Right.
industry, we're very advanced. We're cutting edge. We lead in pretty much everything.
Mhm.
Qualifications are the highest, standards are the highest. But there's places like this where if you ask for help, you are shunned, you're outcasted, you're put on an island. And that's where you find out that literally you're just a number filling a position. It doesn't matter what you did for your whole career. It doesn't matter that you busted your ass every single day, put your life on the line. It doesn't matter because they want you on the job right now working or they don't want you at all.
Yep.
Mhm.
Uh, Literally, like what you're talking about, I've experienced firsthand. It's so true. And when you're in the Air Force, you can't be as exclusionary as like civilian police departments. And security forces, is the one of the largest career fields in the Air Force. So everybody winds up in, even people, I know, and not to be mean, but you've looked at somebody and said, maybe this shouldn't be what you should do, right? And but so when you can't be as exclusionary, you get a lot of people that tend to, they stay in, they make rank, and they get into these positions, right? Chiefs, senior master sergeants, captains, commanders, all those ranks. And man, that whole thing about, looking or feeling like this problem is something you want to distance yourself from, and the cancer that you talked about, that is such a prevalent theme across the board. And I've been stationed places where it was worse than others, and you meet good leaders and people that allow you to sit down and talk to you, and typically it's the people that have been through things themselves.
Yes.
And you find, and I found, right, and you speak for myself or not for others, but that the people that haven't really gotten their feet wet, so to speak, and don't have the experience that others do, they tend to be the people that are the most harsh critics of those who need to seek help for things that they've gone through. And so maybe it's just they have never dealt with that. But anyway, like it's like listening to somebody else that, somebody I know talk
Mhm.
about this, is just how relatable that is, because it's still such a theme in the security forces career field.
Yeah, there was the last base that I was at before I got stationed here. I want to say it was in a span. I could be off by a month or two, but it was in a span of like 2 to 4 months, maybe. And all four individuals were in the SF career field, and they had all committed suicide on the base. And so I'm just like, wow, it's like one after another, after another, after another. And, not going to go into the severity because I know some people are like, oh, what happened? But, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter like what they did. It's, unfortunately, they're no longer here. But when I hear about the stories and obviously being on the base, like my first thing is like, hey, did they seek help or did they ask for anything? And the number one response, like my career was extremely short lived. I got in 2.5 years. I'm unfortunately getting out, right? And so every response that I've heard so far of somebody that has committed suicide or hurt themselves in the career field that all three of us have been in, every single one of them was like they're too afraid, they're too scared, this one person is embarrassed. And I'm like, man, like, do they understand? Like, my wife and I, we don't talk about it all the time, but it's just like very seldom. It's like if we're out and about, whether it's a grocery store or at an event or something like that, you walk past somebody and just giving somebody a smile or saying, hey, like that can change their aspect. I had a person Long story short, in a grocery store, walked past the guy, and I just smiled and I was like, "Hey, how you doing?" And I just kept going, right? He came around and found me and was like, "Man," he was like, "I was actually like I have been like contemplating like suicide." And he said, "Just because you said hi to me," he said he was like, "Man," he was like, I don't want to anymore." And I was like, I was younger. I'm 33 now. I couldn't remember. I must have been like young 20s or something like that. And I was like, holy cow. And looking back then, I'm like, man, that's awesome. I'm glad. But as I get older, like I really cherish like that conversation that I had with that guy. Um but this goes in like what I'm trying to talk about next is um, the one thing that I really don't agree with is leadership, or supervisors or what have it. It's everyone's like, "Hey, I have an open door policy." I'm like, "Okay,
Mhm.
cool, I hear you, but my thing is that like, why don't you go out and go around and actually talk and show face? People get in a conversation because when I hear I have an open door policy, I'm like, I'm not going to go talk to you. Like, I don't want to go in there into the squadron or have a conversation and then because you're like a target per se because once you go in there, people are like, oh, what's he going in
You're
there
putting
for?
yourself in the lion's den.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah,
I just don't agree with that, and I don't care what the individual schedule is. You can make time out of your day to go and hit up wherever you need to go and just show face and not try to be this imposing figure to people that people do get anxiety, they get stressed out about it.
yeah,
Intimidated.
Yeah, just go learn your troops, right?
yeah,
Like get to know them because you going and talking to them and like just kind of like BSing and having a nice civil conversation could totally change somebody's aspect and really kind of bring them out of this slump. So that's
absolutely.
what he was, asking you is that like, what are some of the institutional things that you've gone through while you were in.
Yeah.
Well, to go back to what you were just talking about, first of all, the open door policy, I laugh because I mean, I remember from my security forces days, even my civilian law enforcement days, but and I was a flight leader, I was a flight commander, all that stuff, chief security forces. But
Mhm.
if I'm a commander and I've got a young airman come to my office, the first thing I'm going to say is, "Where's the flight commander? Where's the flight chief? Where's the ops officer? Like, why is this guy in my office?" Right? I mean, that's the reality of it.
It is.
And as a police chief, same thing. If I just go right into the chief's office and my sergeant finds out about it, my lieutenant finds out about it, they're like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, like
Yeah.
what's going on here?" Right? And
Mhm.
so now, on top of that, so I agree with you, first of all, that leaders need to be out in the field. They need to be visiting with the troops and having real
Yeah.
conversations. And I know both in the military and civilian law enforcement, as you move up the ranks, it's less hands on, less out in the field, more stuck in the office.
Definitely.
Mhm.
And so the highlight of my entire career was a butter bar, working nuke security in the missile fields, Nebraska and Wyoming, because I was in the field every day, all day, even sleeping out of the sites with
Yep.
the guys and gals. So the thing is, and back then, even as a young lieutenant, I didn't have like those life experiences. I hadn't gone through a bunch of bad shit. I didn't have that mindset of like, I'm going to be open and vulnerable about my feelings, what I'm going through, because I felt like I had to put this image up that I'm just like this perfect badass, that's always looking sharp, that's always
Yeah.
sharp, that's got something to prove. And I got to be out there taking charge and taking names.
Mhm.
And I know the mission has to get done, and we do have to be badasses, and we have to respond to calls as police officers. But as real leaders, we need to be open and we need to be vulnerable because you can have that open door policy, but if you are not, as a leader, open and vulnerable, and you're not willing to share first and be human
Mhm.
and be real, no way in hell is any subordinate going to open up to you. And that's the key to this whole discussion is that if you want your people to open up to you and to trust you, there has to be trust. And the only way that's established is if that leader breaks the walls down
Yep.
and shows their real, true, imperfect human self.
Mhm.
Not this perfect commander, squadron commander image, or group commander image, or police chief image, because that's what it is, right? It's no, I'm perfect. I have a perfect career.
Mhm.
I'm worried about the next rank,
Mhm.
or I'm worried about the next command or the next city I'm going to be a chief at. No, worry about your people. And it's so simple when you really think about it. Is It's what we're doing here right now. Before we started this episode, you shared something with me that was very personal, right?
Yep.
What did that do? It built trust between you and I.
For sure.
How hard? I mean, it is hard. I don't want to say it wasn't hard.
No,
It is hard, but I think the key is once you open that door and you establish that relationship, then it's easy and your people will come to you when they need to come to you.
Yeah, show you're a human.
yeah, it humanized the rank, we like to say, right?
Exactly.
And I think the reason why a lot of people don't is because showing that you care and having empathy and going out and talking to people and spending your time with the people that you work with isn't lucrative to ranking rank. It's not conducive to promoting, right?
Yeah.
And I think that the culture of the Air Force, in my opinion, incentivizes promoting over the people that you work with. And so you wind up with senior NCOs and officers that end up alienating so many people that they work with because they are so focused on where am I going to be at next, what's the next assignment, where am I going to vector myself to where I can promote, what do I need to do to promote all these certain things. And the people that I've met that are the best leaders are the ones that, like you said, they can break down walls and have conversations with you, will stop what they're doing and have conversations with you. And that is 100% the key to all of this.
Yeah.
And because I've met so few people that will do that, but they are the ones that leave the biggest impact. And I messaged you last night, asked you if you knew a certain person, and said that they were one of the greatest flight chiefs I've ever had. That man would sit in front of us. I mean, sometimes we had like guard mounts that were like, this is like more like 40 minutes, like we should post. But he's sitting there just talking about, when I was, a chubby airman and needed to get my ass in gear and get in shape. I had this tech sergeant that was just running behind me the whole time and like talking about all these people that made a difference in his life, just trying to relate to us, right? And it's not hard. It really isn't hard. And it's just so wild because the solution is simple, but
Yes.
you have to partake and be proactive in the solution for it to matter and to make a difference.
So many more people would be retainable too in the field.
Right.
Oh,
Talking about, yes.
That's another thing too, is because like what keeps a good employee at a job, right? Like you take care of them, you show that you're human, you understand them, you care for them, XYZ. There's a plethora of things to talk about, but there's so many people that I have met too that are like, dude, I'm getting out. I can't stand this because of this person. Like, and I'm like, man, like this one individual is ruining this other person's career.
yes.
And then from there, it's a spider web effect. And it's just going to go down the ranks because that person's probably not going to recommend the military for somebody else. Hey, this is what happened to me. This is the trauma that I went through.
Yep.
And, like you guys are saying, it's a very simple fix. Like just be a human at the end of the day. Don't let the thing up here get in your way on your beret. And it's like, or your chest. But it's wild to me that people are, how you said earlier, so like two-faced
Yes.
with how they are as soon as they put on that uniform and then when they take it off. Like there's a story I just heard. I'm gonna say not too long ago, just in case they're listening and they kind of correlate it. But this said person, supervisor, if you will, was kind of like nippy and jumpy at the throat, and then the person that this individual was talking to, they both saw each other off base. And then it was like nothing happened. It was like, I don't want to say word for word, but it was more of like a, hey man, how you doing? Like, what's going on? Like, everything is cool. And then I'm like, I think to myself, hearing that story, I'm like, dude, like 24 hours ago, you were just like this other person nipping and throwing at this guy's throat for something that he was trying to possibly make better. And it's like you didn't want to hear him out. You wanted to jump straight into the, hey, this is what's on my chest, like what I say goes, and it's awful, and I know it'll probably never end, but like bureaucracy is like such a cancer for that too. It's just it's bad.
I think one of the things too, we were talking about proactivity and getting being a solution, right? Somebody in my Air Force career comes to mind, and when I was in Germany, she was just so proactive at getting to know the people on our flight that she knew things that the flight chief didn't know. She knew things that other NCOs didn't know. She was the person that these airmen would go to for guidance, even if they weren't. She wasn't their supervisor, right? She was so active, like she was known to other airmen on other flights about, hey, this is somebody I can go to, right? And you don't see a lot of people like that, And it can be kind of hard to be that person. But the other thing too is when you get down into that level and start learning about other people, you hear a lot of other things that go on, and you can become a tool to help in other ways that you didn't even realize. If I sit down and talk with Airman A and I'm learning about these problems, I learn that, oh, well, Airman B's got this issue too, and you kind of learn, like you said, about the spiderweb like network of issues that is going on. Um, and you can begin fixing those things. But the other thing with it too is, yeah, leadership needs to be better about going out and talking to people and getting to know their people. But the person to your left and right, they need to be better about that too. And it's not even, you could be two tech sergeants talking, or a group of staffs and techs having that conversation, and peer to peer need to be better, about that, because I think that ties more into what you're saying about the shunning piece. Is when your friends turn your back on you, the other NCOs, the other airmen that you work with, that makes the biggest difference. And I'm sure it's was even more cutthroat in the officer community, and maybe you can expand on that more if you want. But it is inserting yourself and getting into the root of those problems is what the solution is, for sure.
No, I agree 100%. I mean, it's simple. It's being human.
Mhm.
It's putting the guard down. It's getting rid of this perfect image and this front that people are putting up. I found that oftentimes what people appear to be the most abrasive or assholes
Mhm.
are actually dealing with shit that they're not dealing with. So they have stuff going on in their own lives. And I talk about this in my book, but I kind of projected that out so that people wouldn't approach me, people wouldn't talk to me.
Yeah.
And this is one of the mistakes I made. I'm not here to say, hey, I was a great this and I was a great that, because I made a lot of mistakes. But my point is that we may see people out there that seem like they're just assholes, but in reality, they may be suffering themselves,
Yeah.
and they're not dealing with it. And that's the sad reality of it, is that, let's say you have a supervisor who's dealing with shit, but doesn't want to acknowledge it. And then they got people who are dealing with shit that
Yep.
come to them and they don't want to talk to it because they think if I open that door, then now people are going to find out about my stuff. It's just like, it's like this domino effect.
It is.
But if we have this environment where it's trusted, it's safe to do so, that's not going to happen. And the ironic thing is, like in the civilian law enforcement world, we have active shooter situations that happen all the time, right, in the news, and it's a cop's worst nightmare. But
Just have one in Roseville.
yeah, and the thing is, we're trained now. Training's changed. When I first became a cop to like the last since Columbine, it's like, hey, the first on scene, there might just be two of you, but you're going in and you're going to neutralize that threat, right? And so I knew in my heart that everyone I worked with, they're going to have my back in that situation. That we're going to start running towards that danger, and we're going to take care of business. Like I trusted my life with them, right? But why is it that I couldn't trust anyone I worked with to talk about the real shit that I was dealing with inside? And it's because of the stigma. It's because of the shame associated with looking at weak. It's like you're weak. Now,
Yeah.
you're talking about feelings. You're talking about how something affects you. That's weakness, especially if you want to talk about men, right? I mean,
Yep.
let's be true here, right? So, man to man, a man talking about emotions and feelings is looked at as you're weak,
Yeah. Vulnerable.
Yep.
right? And who wants to be around somebody who's weak, right? I mean, that's the reality of the security forces world. That's the reality of all first responders, whether you're a firefighter, paramedic, a police officer. But that's not the reality of who we are.
Mhm.
And you can be an invincible badass and still talk about your feelings.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I really try to reinforce in this book, is that it's like, look, I did all these things. I was a Raven. I was undercover for 2 years on a state drug task force. I had to kill a guy that was trying to kill me and other people, right? But all that shit has an effect on me. And I should be able to talk about that. And that doesn't make me weak.
No.
And that's what we have to get to, is change this culture that talking about feelings is just normal.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying make a big deal about it. Let's address it, let's acknowledge it, and let's move on. And I think if we do that, we can get through full careers, whether it's the military, law enforcement, we can come out healthy on the other side. But if we don't change it, that's why we have a 5-year life expectancy as cops. When we retire, most cops die within 5 years.
Wow.
I did not know that.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of that's lack of sleep, poor eating, lack of exercise, but most of that is stress.
Yeah.
And stress has tremendous effects on the body. And like for me, I have no doubt that my cancer that I had is attributed to my stress.
Absolutely.
And you look at stress and what results from
It's
stress:
awful.
cancer, heart attacks, strokes. I mean, you name it. And that's why we have to change this.
I was just getting ready to mention that because just recently, like I have had a lot of work related stress up until recently. And if you'd have seen me 8 months ago, I was like 40 pounds heavier than I know. And 100% that was because I could not cope with what was going on. And so you're right, like stress does a number on your body. And normalizing these sorts of conversations is what you're talking about, and in making it okay to talk out in the open, making it okay to go and have a conversation privately if you want to, and creating, like you said, replacing the culture of not talking about it, and being a man, and all that stuff, right? And obviously it's not just men, but that is 100% what is going to change it, is being able to normalize those conversations. And being I have been in work environments where I can talk about situations and other people felt like they could talk about situations, and 100% it was enabled by somebody who actually was willing to sit there and talk about themselves and listen to what you had going on. And it's amazing what happens if you, like you say, you were our flight, you sitting here talking about what happened to you,
Yeah.
how much the room would open up, how much people would just come sit down and listen to you. It's almost it's like a phenomenon, you know what I mean? How much you stay away from that one person who's just like, oh man, yeah, my shit hot, my shit doesn't stink, blah blah blah. And then you sit down and have this conversation with somebody, and we just all flock to that person like they're Jesus. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And it's there is such a big effort in a lot of ways for people now trying to normalize these conversations, but there's so much pushback as well.
Yes.
And there's a lot of things in the military that create that pushback, right? You know, like the global climate of what's going on in the world, and a lot of other things, and then individual squadrons and flight leaderships and stuff like that. But the books and things like that and conversations are what help. And I don't want to take too much away from your book because I want people to read it and organically digest what you talk about. But would you be willing to expand more on like what the situation that you're just talking about, how that happened, how that went down? Just kind of explain for the people listening, what happened really in your book with the situation, having to take somebody's life, and how that went down for you.
I won't go into great detail about the event itself, but I'll tell you this, and it's the same with the military, is that, I mean, how much time do we spend on firearms and
Mm.
use of force
Right.
or arrest and control techniques, defensive tactics?
Hmm.
And I knew from day one, both in security forces and civilian law enforcement, that I may have to take a life.
For sure.
It's a reality.
Yeah.
But the other reality is that, I mean, less than 1% of law enforcement officers are ever involved in a fatal shooting. Now, if you watch the news and the media, you would think otherwise, right?
Yeah.
I
TV
mean,
shows.
you would think otherwise.
Oh
And
yeah.
if you even take security forces and you look at how
Mhm.
many security forces members have actually had to kill somebody in the line of duty
Yeah.
compared to the hundreds of thousands of security forces members, I would say it's even less than 1%,
Probably.
right?
Yeah.
So, again, we train for it, we talk about it. You can anticipate how you're going to react or not act. And even in my situation, people reacted differently. I mean, it's just the way it is. You don't know how people are going to react until you're in it. And in my case, it was a completely justified shooting. I
Hmm.
mean, we had a couple that was a witness. We saved their lives.
Yeah.
Our officers were saved. But the reality of it is that I took a human life. It doesn't matter if it fit procedure, if it was covered under the law. For me personally, it's affected me. It affects me every single day,
Of course.
right? And in my case, it was very unusual circumstances. And the person that tried to kill us with a butcher knife,
Mhm.
wasn't some hardened criminal, wasn't some gangbanger, some serial rapist. Up until this crazy night, he was, for all intents and purposes, a good young man that was well liked. He had no history of mental illness. His brother actually he had a twin brother, identical, was in the Air Force. I mean, it's just, and to think that this person is not here because of something I had to do. And that's the thing is, I had no other choice. And people, I think, watching the news and TV think, oh, well, that's your job. That's what you do. So you move on. Everything's fine. You forget about it. No. And I can take that a step further and talk about the hundreds of traumatic incidents from fatal car accidents to suicides to child abuse to sexual assault cases, even natural deaths that I went to almost on a weekly basis. All these incidents have an effect on me because I'm seeing shit and doing shit that most people never should have to. And so, I can't speak for everyone out there. I can only speak for myself. But I know for a fact that that night back in December 2012 will live with me for the rest of my life. I know that without a doubt.
Sitting here listening to you, just thinking, getting a little emotional myself because what you said is so true. Like I can't tell you how many situations that I've gone to where you thinking you're going and it's just going to be something like you're going to emergency response for somebody who needs medical attention or whatever. And I'll share a story that's very minor and in no way as serious as what you dealt with, but you go some.
I'm going to stop you right there
Mhm.
because, and I want you to tell your story, but this is a problem is that, and this isn't against you personally, but I see this often where we want to compare, right? And you said not as bad as yours. And I'm going to stop you there because we all have different experiences and incidents that affect us in different ways. And even in my shooting, everyone was affected differently. And a lot of times, the incidents that affect us the most, also, we may have shit going on personally, whether it's divorce, health stuff, whatever. So we never know what that incident is going to be that affects us the most. And so, out of respect, I want to tell you that no, that's a horrific incident. Whatever it is that you're about to tell me, it affected you. And we've got to get out of this culture of comparing because it's not a competition. And I see this in the treatment programs that I volunteer at, and that stops people from sharing. Because if you have someone, I mean, I've gone to this program. This guy got shot 4 times. He saw his partner get killed right in front of him, and I wanted to shut my pie hole, not share anything.
Right.
Because I'm like, God, this guy, like
How
I'm
could.
not going to share what I'm going through, but we need to change that.
Mhm.
Please share what isn't here because it's affected you. And I guarantee you're probably never going to forget what you're about to tell me.
No, for sure. And for anybody who's been stationed overseas with the 569th at Volgaway, you know that is an extremely busy law
I
enforcement
was at
heavy.
Ramstein,
Okay,
so
so you know
I
about the
do.
569th, right? And so the year I left, that squadron has 7,700 cases that it dealt with in a year, which is wild when you do the math, right?
Yes.
Um, so I have dealt with, and the people that have been at that unit deal with more suicides and child abuse and assaults, domestic violence, stuff like that than most security forces members will get anywhere else. And so that community dealing, and having some people there and knowing we all were going through that camaraderie that built really helped with situations. And so that's when I say been environments where that it was conducive to talking about that stuff. But specifically, like you said, you never know what you're getting into when you show up in. Um, I got dispatched one time to somebody who went missing from work. Long story short, they went missing from work. They were identified as being at home. They were trying to take their own life, right? Went in, um, you know, myself, another tech sergeant I was with, and an Army MP went in, got this guy down from, he was had a noose around his neck, hanging from the garage door,
Mm.
basically. And we're sitting there just waiting for a medical response to show up, talking to this guy. He's very emotional, he's intoxicated, he's crying, all this stuff, and ends up having to he has to go to the bathroom because the dude just killed a bunch of beer. And long story short, he ended up I went to escort this guy to the bathroom, and he ended up getting running from me when we went to go to leave from the bathroom to back to where everybody was. um you know Got a knife, ended up he tried to stab me with that knife. I tried to take the knife from him. Eventually enough people came in the room and was able to give him the ground and take him out, or not take him out, but get him into custody, right?
Mhm.
But just immediately, like, I remember having that adrenaline let down when like everything was done, and then thinking like, holy crap, like we were here literally just to help this guy and he just tried to kill me.
Mhm.
And that thought like just generated it generated a lot of anger. Because I'm just here to help you, right? Generated a lot of anger, like I've got children, all this stuff, like you said, you literally never know what you're getting yourself into when you think, okay, yeah, this is a traffic stop, or I'm going to take a statement from this person because of X, Y, and Z, or whatever. It's so true. Like things can happen and change, and incidents can change, and like, at lightning speed. And
Absolutely.
it is. I'm glad that you said that. About sharing, right? And a lot of people know that story, especially people that worked with me at the time. But like that's the biggest takeaway I had from that experience as far as like work related stuff is I tell so many people now, you literally don't know when you think keep your guard up. You don't know what somebody else is thinking, especially if they're intoxicated or going through something serious on themselves.
Yeah,
Like the situation can change in a heartbeat, and to keep your wits about you 100%. And but that knowing that you know things can change and can change that fast, um, you have to be on your guard. So yeah, just yeah, man, that's it's so true what you said about how things can change that fast. So
and when did that incident happen? What year?
that happened in 2020.
And look at we're now, right? Three
Yeah,
years later,
yeah,
and I bet you remember it like it was yesterday.
for sure. I mean, and there's apparently at some point like I had it yelled for assistance. I don't even remember doing that. But like everything else, especially that adrenaline letdown that I had standing there in this guy's living room, like I'll never forget. I've never had that experience like to that degree
Oh yeah,
before. And because you can literally feel it, like when they say letdown, like it really is, like it feels like it's going down your body, like this just like it's hard to describe unless you've ever felt that. But um I'm just so thankful that I did have people around me immediately that after the fact, were always like checking up on me and saying, "How are you doing?" and all this stuff. And so I was very benefited in that, it benefited in that way for sure. But man, like that to me is speaking so much truth. Things can change in an instant and you have no idea. You could be going to a shoplifting and
absolutely.
X, Y, and Z, right?
Yeah, it's like you were touching base on. It's like I reminded me of a story. Is like child abuse. People experience like the trauma and stuff like that in different variations. And something as what you would assume as harmless that is also informative is a documentary on Netflix. I
Mhm.
don't remember exactly what it's called, but my wife, I would assume has like developed some form of like PTSD from this documentary. And being a mother, now of, our two beautiful kids, of course, and she saw this documentary and it was child abuse.
Mhm.
And it was very well known. It's very popular. I'll see if I can kind of find it offline. But it's so hard for her to watch any documentary that has anything to do with essentially with harming somebody or family. And when she saw that documentary and it was over, I mean, obviously during it and then when it was over, very emotional. It's almost kind of like if you've ever had almost like a panic attack where you get like that shot of adrenaline rush, and then when it's over, like and it's all dumped, you just cry.
Yeah.
And she saw that, and man, she's had nightmares, and she thinks about it all the time, and literally to this day, like I don't bring it up, obviously for those reasons, because we both know, but it's one of those where it's like as a mother, like seeing that and obviously like how loving she is to our kids, she's like, how could somebody ever do something like this where you went to go help that guy
Mhm.
and then he tried to kill you?
Yep.
Like, why would he do that? And it's like that is another situation where in a form of like child abuse that she saw just completely like 180'd her life essentially. And she can never like unsee what happened.
Absolutely.
And she feels better talking about it and like telling family and friends, because what if, like you were saying, what if some people like bottle that up and don't say anything, and who knows what's going to happen? It can reflect like the marriage or whatever is going on with the kids. But
Yeah.
she talked about it, she expressed it, and she is doing, obviously, she's like moved on from it, but it is on the back burner, if you will.
I think that some it really just exhibits and highlights how important it is that when you go out to the responses and you come back to the unit and you're doing casework and you're talking to people and that you work with, that's why it's so important to have that community immediately, to set up support systems for yourself and know it's okay to talk, because it's almost like you go out into the community, you do what you need to do, and you come back and you're there with your family, that community, your people that you work with.
Yeah.
And when it's, again, like I know we've said this so many times since we started talking, but when you don't have that avenue at work where you should be getting genuinely the most support, unless you have like a spouse or somebody like that that's supportive for you, it can be so detrimental to what goes on. I've seen so many people go down that road where they're dealing with something and people just shun them. You know what I mean? So like what you said, like having those experiences and going out and dealing with them and then coming back, like that's so, it just highlights why it's so important to be able to have
Absolutely.
community there at work. So
And it's understanding. I mean, like when you're telling your story, that brought back a story that I dealt with. But
Mhm.
that's the thing is like it's normalizing it, right?
Yep.
So you're telling about a story that happened in Germany. Well, my story that's similar happened in Walnut Creek,
Yeah.
right? And it happened different years, but it was very similar. But it's like the way you felt is the way I felt. And so now we're having a conversation about it, right? It's normal.
Yep.
But the reality is that would be a big deal.
Yeah.
And the reality is, as a security forces member, if I went to that call and I came back to the unit and there was guys and gals that weren't there, they didn't know anything about it. They just heard, oh yeah, you guys went, there was a suicidal guy and you guys hooked him up and whatever, and they're gonna give you jokes and whatnot. They're not gonna understand the impact of it,
Sure.
right? And God forbid if you were to open up and say, no, look, it was an effed up call. Like this, I couldn't sleep last night. Like I had nightmares.
Yeah,
Like that was the closest I've come to dying ever.
for sure.
And that's the reality right there, right? So when you lose that sense of invincibility and it's gone in a second, you may have had it your whole life, your whole career, and whatever that incident was, for whatever reason, on that day, it instantly wiped that away. And now all you think about is your children. You think about not being here for them growing up without you. There's all these just thoughts, yet it's normal. So we're talking about
Yeah, 100%. And I
it.
remember I had the first sergeant I had at the time. He was actually one of the people that reached out and would ask me from time to time how I was doing. And but a couple days after that situation, I don't think I said, but he'd gotten a hunting knife, like a Bowie knife that he'd use to like field dress. And that's what he came at me with. But I was sitting I was in my kitchen doing dishes, and for a couple days, I'm like, man, I feel good. Like other people are like telling me, like, hey, man, like you okay, you okay, you okay. And I'm sitting there and just doing the dishes, and then I was literally cleaning knives that I used to cook, and I have never felt rage like I did in that moment for like about 2 minutes straight. I just stood there with my hands in the water and just felt that, you know what I mean? And I'll never forget that feeling because that's when like I really realized like holy shit, like that feeling you're talking about, like, your kids, and like I started thinking about my daughter. I started thinking about like her wedding and all this stuff, and it's like wow, and I think that's one of the biggest reasons or ways that when people act like they're infallible, that immediately takes a ton of credibility away from you, for me
Yes.
personally, because it's like, dude, you're not, like, you could go someplace and get dispatched somewhere and it changes in a heartbeat and you experience this, or B, like, what are you doing to people that have these experiences that are dealing with trauma or want to create an environment to where other people feel comfortable talking about responses that give traumatic or give trauma to them, and you're now completely and totally inadvertently, right, through your persona and the things you say, eradicating that from the environment, and that sucks. It really
I
sucks.
know we had a conversation outside of here, of course. And did you ever hear back from General Collins at all, like to get something like this, like kind of like a widespread?
Well, actually, it's funny you say that. So, well, the good thing is, so I made this YouTube. I didn't make it. Mission 22 made this film called Stigma of Help. It's
Hmm.
really well done. It's only like 9 minutes.
That's the one you sent me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and anybody watching or listening, just Google Stigma of Help on YouTube. And he actually watched it.
Mhm.
Somebody, I don't know who, a security forces member, showed at the time Brigadier General Roy Collins, who was
Mhm.
the head of security forces, and it touched him so much he actually set up a phone call, and we had a real heart to heart phone discussion. And I can just tell you personally that that man is a true leader. He truly cares about his people. Unfortunately, fortunately for him, he got nominated for a second star.
Yep.
Mhm.
And so I'm not sure where he's assigned yet. I just had an email from him last week, and he
Hmm.
told me he was going to pass on the information to the new one star that just got promoted.
Yeah.
So my hope and my goal is that I do get out there and speak to security forces members because I speak to civilian law enforcement, all over the United States. But I don't see too many security forces members out there talking about this stuff. And unfortunately, I look at it as like street cred, right? Like if you're an SF member and you have a civilian cop come in, I mean, you're going to respect them and you're going to understand it, but it's different when it's one of your own.
Mm-hmm.
When it's different when someone's worn the beret
Yep.
and when they come back and they talk about it. And here's the deal. Yeah, I was a captain eventually. I was out in the field as a lieutenant, but I was a street cop for 14 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've done both sides.
Yep.
I've been there, I've seen it. And so I'm hoping that happens because, and you already mentioned it, but every week I see a new security forces member who's committed suicide.
Yep.
And it's not always active duty. Sometimes it's former members, but as you know,
Yeah.
there's 2 different pages out there that monitor the security forces members. And I would say, not exaggerating, and again, these are underreported, but almost weekly, if you average it out, there's at least one SF member, active duty or former, who commits suicide.
Yep.
And we need to do something about that.
Yeah. And real quick, I just want to highlight, like you said, there are a couple groups out there, a Brave Badge Initiative.
Yes, that's
for
one
sure.
of them.
Those guys are amazing. At Brave Badge Initiative for
Yes.
sure. So I just wanted to
No, they're great. I follow their stuff, and
Yeah.
they're doing great things. So.
Have you talked with like I guess, essential like SF leadership or the squadron over here to at least try to get in to maybe speak to the unit per se, or kind of wash you away?
It's funny because I won't say names or drop anything here, but I ran into a high-ranking member of the 60th SFS.
Mm-hmm.
I actually gave them one of my coins and told them I was a former SF captain, and
Mm-hmm.
here's the things I do. And yeah, I haven't heard anything. So that's the reality of it. Now, granted, I have a lot of friends who are now 06s
Mm-hmm.
that I served with. We were all butter bars together, and so I do have hope. But what I see in the Air Force is that who really controls or has the power to make things like this happen? I mean, I know at the squadron level, the commander does,
Mm-hmm.
but when you look at Air Force wide,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the answer to that, and I don't even know if how much the 1-star can do.
Would hope the top cop can, because I would assume that he could be able to talk to the people higher up or right at the Pentagon or the Air Force to be able to bring something along. I mean, you could probably reach out to Chief Batts. I mean, she seems to be very interactive on social media as well.
Yeah.
I would assume she could help.
I just want to point out that a couple years back we had the Year of the Defender. I don't know if you heard about that, but
Yes.
the year was called Year of the Defender.
I remember that well.
Yeah, and we had more suicides that year than we had previously ever. And one of the things that stuck out with me the most was just how silent security forces leadership was, and then greater Air Force leadership was about that. The people making the most noise were groups like that on Facebook, like Brave Badge Initiative, and other people that I worked with specifically, and then friends I had that were at other bases. And I'm not the only one that feels that way. That's extremely visible. Your silence is a response, right?
I agree.
When you're not saying anything about a literal epidemic in our career field, that's just insane. Like, you are supposed to be the one that's guiding, trying to help fixing the problem, identifying root causes, and coming up with solutions. And you've not said a thing about this.
You know why, right? Let's be real.
Mm-hmm.
It's that perfect image.
It is.
If I'm a squadron commander, if I'm a group commander, and if it's known that, oh my gosh, this guy's had 3 or 4 suicides under his command or her command, that's going to make me look bad, right? So the reality is it's this perfect image and it's a front. And so how do we break through that? I don't know the answer. I'm trying to, but like I said, what's interesting is I've had one opportunity to speak. It was the commander out at Fort Leavenworth in Kansas who actually wanted me to come out and speak. Great colonel, had some discussions, but wasn't able to make it on his end with legal and finance and all the things that the Air Force, all the hurdles you have to jump through.
Yep.
But other than him and the general, I have not heard from any other leadership at all.
I wonder if that's because they just feel like, if they let somebody else quote unquote help with the problem or
Yeah, fix them, right?
solve the
Yeah.
problem, that it will look bad on them for not solving the problem, even though to everyone else it would look like them being proactive to put people in the paths of others that are struggling. You know what I mean? But I
Absolutely.
mean, it could be like you said, that perfect image. I agree. I think that.
But in reality, if we save one life,
Yep.
Totally worth it.
if this book only saved one life, which I already know it has, I know it saved a lot more than that,
Hmm.
then it's worth it. And so that's the thing is stop looking at how much does training cost?
Yeah.
How much does this cost? How much does a human life cost?
Yeah.
Hmm.
There was a question that I saw. This guy asked this other individual. He went up to him and said, "Hey, um, if I gave you, or it was something along the lines of like, if I gave you $10 million, would you take it?" And this guy was like, "Yeah." He goes, "But you would die tomorrow." And then the guy goes, "Oh, then I wouldn't do it." And he goes, "So that just shows you right there that your life is worth more than
Yes,
$10 million, right?"
absolutely.
And so when he asked me that question, I'm like, wow, like that's pretty powerful. Like something, $10 million, right? Who wouldn't want to take that for
Yeah,
free? But then he was like, "But you die tomorrow, or like you only live for 24 hours." Then they're immediately like, "No."
that's
Yeah.
great. It's a concrete
Yes.
example
Yeah.
that everyone would say, yeah, I feel the same way.
Yeah.
Yep.
So again, why aren't we putting more money, more resources towards suicide prevention
Hmm.
instead of just, we have these programs that we check the box,
Hmm.
but if nobody's using them, if nobody's being vulnerable and opening up, they're
Hmm.
completely worthless.
I mean, let's be honest too. In the Air Force, like back when younger in your career, the CDCs, or you got to go in and do those, read those programs. But when you're sitting there, you just skip.
Oh
Everybody
yeah.
skips, right?
Mhm.
You go through the mental health ones, you skip. If you get it wrong, you can go back and get the right answer. No, I mean, nobody really like pays attention. Nobody takes the time to learn that stuff, and it sucks because you have these people that are just doing this, skipping through everything just to get it and get a pass, and oh, I've check marked this off, and where there are some people I've caught myself doing it where I'm like, man, like I'm not just going to sign this dotted line. Like I want to read through it and I want to understand like what is going on, because what if a situation popped up, this training that they give us, that we understand, and have the situation arise, we know what to do, so.
Well, how about if you just have an NCO have training and they just share a personal experience?
Yeah.
I think that's a lot better than any kind of computer
Yeah.
aided press the return button. And so if we look at every flight, every squadron, every group, I know there's people out there that have been through shit,
Yeah.
and we need those people willing to share that.
Mhm.
But that has to come with that culture. That's where the power is.
Yeah.
A while back, and so I'll like highlight a few things I know that are positive that are going on. This one's like not so positive because they got rid of the program, but um, there was something a few years ago called Defender's Edge. Do you,
Mhm.
do you remember hearing about that?
Yes.
Right. And that was 100% focused on putting people through training to learn how to help with all kinds of things, right? Like circadian rhythm, helping people understand how to sleep, helping people, understand how your body works with anxiety, your nervous system, all that stuff, and then going back to your squadrons and then helping disseminate that information and being a person that somebody could come to, right?
Mhm.
And the goal is for you to like push that training out. So I got to go to that course and when I got back, I had a conversation with our chief because they're like, "Hey, go back, talk to your chief. They're the ones that they know about these programs." Blah blah. Blah. Literally got told, "Yeah, we're not doing that. Get out of here." Basically,
Of course.
so it's just kind of nuts. Like we've tried to do stuff like that, and now Defender's Edge is gone. And it was only a week course, but man, like I learned a ton about what real resiliency looked like, understanding that resiliency and overcoming some of the stuff you're going on is in your hands as far as like seeking help and what you can do to take better care of yourself. And so it had a lot of really, really good things. But something that I know that security forces squadrons are doing now, because it happened to me in Germany and then it's here at Travis too. A little different in Germany was we had an actual chaplain that had an office in our
Mhm.
squadron. And anytime something happened, whether we had like a death that we'd responded to, or serious child abuse or whatever, the chaplain literally would come and
Awesome.
talk, right? And they had an office where they maintained hours, and the goal was to hope to have a couple of chaplains where they could just have like a rotating door where there was always somebody there. And it never got to that point before I left. But here at Travis, they have the True North program,
Okay.
and so the main person that's assigned to our squadron, she's prior military. She wasn't security forces; she was maintainer.
Yeah.
But she understands what the military lifestyle is like, and they have that, and it's now they have certain things, right? If you go in there and you say you're going to shoot the commander, you're going to hurt yourself, or whatever, they
Of
have to
course.
report those
Yeah.
things. But they're there specifically as an avenue outside of your chain of command to go and talk to. And that's something that security forces in general is trying to put in squadrons. Like she has an office in our building that you can go to. Now, I wish it in our squadron specifically was better located and not on the same floor as all squadron leadership,
Yeah.
right? And I think that definitely is a deterrent for people walking in there. But you can go see her at mental health as well, right? Because
Yeah.
she's an actual mental health provider. So there are steps being taken to try and help that out, but there's still a lot of box checking for sure, especially with using. I think first sergeants are kind of getting overused and used in ways that they probably shouldn't be, in putting
Yeah.
shirts in situations that they shouldn't be involved in. I mean, a shirt wouldn't tell you that because that's just who they are. But there's a lot of things that shirts have to do within their scope of responsibility and dealing with all of what goes on, takes away from them doing their job, takes away from other people. So they need to give other solutions other than first sergeants for sure. So the step in having chaplains right in the squadron, or programs like True North right in the squadron, are great steps, I feel like. And I know a lot of people have used True North in our squadron. A lot of people used the chaplain that was in our squadron when I was in Germany. But it's not enough, and
Yeah.
it needs to keep going. And I hope that the Air Force doesn't say, cool, here's a good Band-Aid, and we'll just leave it there for a while until the
Yeah.
Band-Aid starts to peel off, and then we need to fix the problem again. So hopefully, with these steps, and seeing progression and getting better and fixing stigmas and stuff like that, they don't just say, okay, cool, that's enough, and stop. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And that's kind of a fear of Mike, is how much is the military good at saying, okay, that's enough, and we'll just kind of focus on other things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Let's kind of like jump back a little bit. Like, how was the Raven part of that for you? Because I know that can kind of, I got injured during it, of course, and and I know you did too a little bit. But how was that for you?
For me, as soon as I found out about the Raven program, it was something I wanted to do.
Mhm.
I felt as a leader, like I was one of those guys that I wanted to lead by example.
Hmm.
And so when I actually went through the Raven program, I was at Travis. I was the chief security forces for the AMOG at the time. It was
Mhm.
615th AMOG before they had a CRW or anything like that.
Mhm.
And from day one, my goal was to go to Raven training. And I remember I would train with the guys at the 60th, and
Hmm.
I ended up going to school with, I think, a couple senior airmen, and we would train together every day, PT, and they were a lot younger than me.
Yeah.
I think I was 29 or 30 when I went through Raven School, and I was the captain and the class leader. So I
Mhm.
literally got the shit kicked out of me,
Yep.
which I should have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't weigh a lot, but I lost like 20, 25 pounds. I mean,
Jeez.
yeah, I looked horrible. And but to this day, I just look back as like what an accomplishment
Yeah,
because
it's cool.
um and I don't know, I heard maybe it's gotten a little softer. I hope that's not true. But this is back in 2004, and I mean, that's to me, that was pride, is that to get through something that sucked so bad and to make it out the other side and actually accomplish something. Like
Hmm.
today, I look back and I'm just damn proud of that. I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, and I know there's the naysayers out there, and you hear like at other bases that don't have Raven programs, and
Yeah. Travis is the
they
hub.
they want to talk crap and all that. And all I say to them is go through the training, go do the work, and you're actually going to love it. And I was a captain, so I wasn't out there doing active missions, but I was
Mhm.
doing foreign airfield assessments in like
Mhm.
South America and whatnot with the AMOG. But I couldn't think of a better job.
Sure.
I mean, you want to talk about a great job, and yeah, the training sucks. You get through it.
It's supposed to suck.
It's supposed to suck, and
It
I
bleeds.
saw 2 butter bars get cold knocked out right in front of me,
Hell yeah.
and
Oh,
yeah, and it was just and, the airman I went with from the 60th actually detached his entire tricep, and this guy was fit. I mean, the whole tricep detached,
yeah.
but he went back. I heard, like, 7 months later, 8 months later, and made it.
surgeon.
Yeah, better anesthesiologist.
Yeah. So you gotta want it, but
Yeah.
and we have a little preface in the beginning of the book that kind of explains the Raven program because I think most people aren't aware of it unless you're SF or if you work at Air Mobility Command and whatnot.
Yeah.
And people always ask, "Is that special?" I'm like, no, it's not special forces. It's just a subset of security forces.
It's more specialized training.
Yes.
Yeah.
Specialized mission set. Yeah, for sure.
And usually more fits and in shape. And
They definitely run you, and I, the guys that I went through last year with, I mean, they're there and they got there because they can get it done. And I mean, these guys they're horses, man. They could just go and go and go and go because that's the training. It is very continuous.
Yeah.
So
And you're trained not to ever give up. So
never, yeah.
And that's something that'll stay with you for the rest of your life. So.
Yeah. How much more time do you have, actually? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Cool. All right. I was gonna ask you about the ganglion blocker thing, but if you got to get going, that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's probably gonna get into a long.
Cool.
No, yeah. It's so he was able to, where he works at, he was able to is it the 3D print just right over here.
Yeah.
That little unit for you.
Oh, nice.
Which is actually, it's kind of cool. Yeah, that's how we're able to get this one over
Oh,
here.
yeah, that's nice. Oh, sweet.
So he was
just
did,
kind of commemorate the
Yeah, I like
coming in
that.
talking to us, and
That's awesome.
you can set it up or whatever you end up doing,
Yeah,
with a little
appreciate it.
double-sided tape or something.
Yeah.
Nice.
hooked up with these little guys too, which is really nice.
Yeah, that's nice. Fancy,
Yeah.
fancy.
Yeah. Well, that is going to wrap up this episode. And we hope this was very insightful, informative for you guys. Pretty eye-opening, with everybody kind of sharing an experience in some way, and mainly Michael and what he's gone through and why he wrote this book and why it's so near and dear to his heart as well to everybody else. And at the end of the day is don't be afraid to talk about it with somebody and just to get it, essentially get it off your chest and get that burden off of you. Cause it could save your life. It could save somebody else's life. And then you doing that by yourself, you could also, spider web affect that and hit people that and relatives and friends and so on and so forth.
Yeah. I really love what you said earlier about comparison, because I probably would have never said anything to you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it really got into what I was feeling and what had happened, but that is the biggest thing I'll take away from the situation is this isn't a game of comparison. This isn't the trauma Olympics. You know what I mean? So I appreciate you doing that.
Yeah. And that's the thing is every incident is different for everybody. Yeah. And you never know what your breaking incident's going to be. Mm-hmm. It's not always the big ones. And that's the thing is that I know guys and gals that have been in multiple shootings, and that's not what broke them. It was a kid dying in a pool.
Sure.
Or a kid that they had to give CPR to. So that's the thing is like, you never know what it's going to be. And it's never a comparison.
Yeah.
It just isn't. And that's where the understanding has to come in, is that if, you're telling me something heartfelt and it matters to you, then I need to truly like take that in and understand it and not look at it from my point of view, but look at it from you, like how it's actually affecting you.
Yeah.
And if we all do that, I mean, that's where there's going to be real change.
Yeah.
And real movement. So I appreciate you sharing that.
No doubt.
I appreciate this episode, and
you got some. Yeah.
Yeah. Let them know where they can pick up that too. Yeah.
It's only on Amazon. So there's a hard copy, paperback, or Kindle. It's bestseller for over 20 weeks.
It's awesome.
I mean, if you're kind of leery, read the reviews. I mean, we have 380 reviews, and most are multiple paragraphs where people are literally pouring out their hearts. So my last advice is that if you're married, if you have a spouse, have your spouse or partner read this book. You read it, and then have a conversation together afterwards.
I love that.
Yeah, and we're gonna have a still picture in here for you guys as well to kind of go through the episode, so you guys can kind of see it firsthand if not looking it up by chance.
I'll link the Amazon page for purchasing our socials.
And at the end of the day, this is huge. We're very thankful and humbled to have you on here and share your experiences with us and kind of have like this outreach for people. If you guys go onto our Spotify, Instagram, and Apple podcasts, you can watch and listen there.
YouTube.
And also YouTube as well. Where we have multiple platforms for outreach for you guys to stay engaged with us like you guys always have been. We greatly appreciate it. We read all the comments, believe it or not, we read everything. And we greatly appreciate you guys tuning in and watching and giving us, voices to be out there for y'all. And so we will catch you guys on episode 7 after this one.